If we venture out of our homes, and especially in a city as large as Los Angeles, it's not difficult to find homeless and poor people, some of them begging for food and money. Next to the freeways, sheltering around the overpasses, we're almost guaranteed when we go out to see someone in need. And as easy as it is to find them, it's just as easy for us to turn our heads away. It can sadly become part of our normal life. St. Martin of Tours, our parish's patron saint, decided one day to show... Sorry, I'm holding out of the tent here. It's kind of flying away. Okay. St. Martin of Tours, our parish's patron saint, decided one day to show compassion to a beggar. And that experience of compassion changed his life forever after. Martin was born shortly after the legalization of Christianity in the early 300s, so nearly 1700 years ago, in the Roman province called Pannonia, which is nowadays known as Hungary. He was the son of a soldier in the Roman army, a cavalry officer, and he was raised in the worship of the Roman gods, which was very typical even after the legalization of Christianity for some time. But at the age of 10, he discovered Christianity. And he discovered that he wanted, against the wishes of his parents even, to become Catholic. And so he enrolled as what we call a catechumen. This is a person who is committed to learning about the Catholic faith and preparing for baptism. At the age of 15, as the oldest son of a cavalry officer, the Roman law required Martin to enlist in the Roman cavalry, to take his father's place. And he was assigned to a regiment in Gaul, which is now France. One day, as he was approaching the city, and I'll pronounce it in the American way, Amiens, okay, in the north of France, he saw a beggar outside the city gates, almost naked, shivering in the cold. And Martin decided to show compassion by cutting his military cape in half to share with the beggar. That's the very well-known story that we have of St. Martin. That night, Martin had a dream. He saw Jesus clothed in the half cape that he had sliced off, and accompanied by angels around him. And Jesus spoke to the angels, "Martin, who is still only a catechumen, has clothed me with this robe." When Martin woke up, he decided not to delay his baptism any longer, and he was 18 years old and was baptized. He continued to serve as a soldier for some time after that, but then came to believe that it was wrong to fight in battles for the Roman emperor and for the Roman Empire. Before a big battle in Germany was about to take place, he approached the Roman emperor who happened to be present for the battle, and he declared to the Roman emperor, "I am a soldier of Christ. I cannot fight." And this is a connection with our second reading today, where St. Paul urges us to be strong in our faith and to endure hardships with him as a good soldier of Christ. So already this image of Christians as soldiers of Christ was already there in the Bible. The emperor then decided to have him arrested because it looked like that he was chickening out of the battle, basically. So the Roman emperor had him arrested for cowardice. And this was a big crime for soldiers, especially in time of war, because the idea is if one soldier basically said, "I don't want to fight," it could inspire all the other soldiers not to fight as well. And the generals did not want to see that. And so they had him arrested for cowardice and we're going to put him on trial to have him killed. But to show that he was not a coward, because that was not the reason why St. Martin didn't want to fight. He actually told the Roman emperor, "Okay, to prove to you that I am not a coward, I will actually go unarmed in front of the Roman army tomorrow when the battle begins, if that's the way to prove to you. I will walk out on the battlefield with no armor, no weapons, and I will show you that I'm not afraid. That's not the reason I won't fight. It's because of my Christian beliefs that I won't fight." And so his superior said, "Okay, fine. Tomorrow morning when the battle begins, we're going to send you right out to the front lines, and you're going to be the first one in the battle then with no weapons and no armor. Go ahead." But during the night, the invaders decided to actually ask for peace. They decided to call off the battle and ask for peace instead. And so St. Martin actually ended up being released from his military service after that, and he went to the city of Tours in France, where he entered training, not as a soldier again, but as a monk and as a priest. So several years later, he was actually named bishop of the city of Tours. And so he was known as bishop for his great mercy to poor people and especially to prisoners. He was very big on trying to have prisoners released from imprisonment. And also he was known for his work of spreading the gospel of Jesus to all the people of Gaul, France at the time. And this connects also with our first reading today about the mission of Jesus that St. Martin continued in his own ministry, bringing good news to the poor, bringing release to prisoners, right? And also there's a little reference at the very end to the poor being clothed in a glorious mantle. A mantle is another fancy name for a cape, because of course St. Martin chose to clothe the poor beggar in his cape. St. Martin eventually ended up dying in the year 397. Now, St. Martin always kept that half of the cape after his encounter with Jesus. Throughout his entire life, he kept that as a treasure. After his death, this half a cape also became a treasure to other Christians who passed it along as what we call a relic. Now, a relic means like a holy object that's left behind by a saint, and that we keep very respectfully as a way of staying connected with that saint who leads us to Jesus. Now, this half a cape then was passed along and passed along. Eventually, when there were kings in charge of that part of the world, the Holy Roman Emperor Charlemagne wanted the piece of the cape, and so they gave it to him. And so eventually, and through him, it got passed on to all the early kings of France. Now, when Charlemagne, he was a great warlord, unfortunately, not always a man of peace. But one of the things he would do is he always liked to have this cape around him, especially when he went out into battles. And so in between battles, though, he built a special small church for the cape. Now, it's interesting to know the words for this, the words that were used by Charlemagne and the people of the time. This little cape, okay, the big full cape was called a capa. That was the name for the big cape. When you slice the cape in half and it's only a little cape, the name for that is capella. It's what's called a diminutive. It's a smaller version of the big one. So capella was the name of this half cape. And what happened was Charlemagne appointed a priest to take care of this relic of St. Martin, right, in that little church that he built for it. And so the priest who took care of the capella was called the capellanu. Okay, and this eventually capellanu morphed into the French word chapelain, which is chaplain. So we actually get the word chaplain from this little half cape of St. Martin that was being taken care of by the priest. And what happened was when the king wanted the relic of St. Martin's cape to go with him on his battles, the priest would travel with the soldiers and offer spiritual care while also taking care of the cape in special temporary churches that Charlemagne would build. And so the priest would offer spiritual care, and then it became known that all the priests who traveled with the soldiers into battle were called military chaplains. And the king built these little churches all along the places where he went into battle. And wherever the army went and these little churches were built, these little churches became known as chapels. And it all comes back to St. Martin's capella, St. Martin's little cape that he had. And that's where we get the name chapel, chaplain, all these things from. And the idea of military chaplains accompanying soldiers into the battlefields comes from this time period as well. So all of this connects with our patron saint today. Now, a little bit of a aside, but I will connect it in. I was rolling around in my mind whether or not I should talk about the current political situation that we're going through in our country right now. And I thought to myself, it's easier not to mention it, especially with a children's mass. But then I thought, that's the coward's way out, basically. St. Martin was not a coward, and I shouldn't be either. And so I decided I have to say something. How we adults conduct ourselves at this moment of history will be very important for the next generation. Children look to us, grown-ups, on how to be a grown-up, how to be an adult. An important realization when we look at the numbers that have been projected on the TV screens is that the country is divided very nearly 50-50. Perhaps not so evenly divided here in our own state of California, but as an overall reality, it's very closely divided. If our political attitude is divide and conquer, how is that going to work when half the country will simply dig in and resist? If we are to have one America instead of a patchwork of red and blue counties, there must be a real demonstration of an old virtue called magnanimity. Now, when we break down magnanimity, it means literally large-mindedness instead of narrow-mindedness. And there must be an attitude of generosity to half of the Americans who don't share our political views, rather than making them into our enemies. Or, if looking at half the country as our enemy becomes the new normal, we all know that the political situation changes every several years. And when the shoe is on the other foot, when another political party is in the majority in D.C. or in Sacramento, it will only cause deeper division among us, which is ultimately not good for anyone. What kind of a country do we want to shape and pass on to the next generation? There is a lot hanging in the balance right now. So much depends on how we decide to communicate with each other, especially with our children and grandchildren, and how we treat our neighbors, as enemies, or as Jesus says, as one of these least brothers of mine. The gospel today asks us to follow St. Martin's example by showing compassion to the poor and to the suffering, remembering that they are Jesus in our midst. St. Teresa of Calcutta, more popularly known as Mother Teresa, used to say that the poor are Jesus Christ in a distressing disguise. By showing compassion to them, as St. Martin did, we honor the Lord, who tells us in today's gospel, "Whatever you did for one of the least brothers of mine, you did for me."